Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pod TV Network show on medicine and science. And today we have a very special topic we're going to look at. It's called MPOX, which I think is monkeypox, and COVID-19. For the anti-vaxxers who think COVID-19 has gone away, well, it hasn't, and it may have reared its ugly head again. And MPOX is a new thing that's down the street. So with that, we need somebody who knows a little bit about medicine and science, somebody who's a board certified in internal medicine and also an FACP, as opposed to, yes, there are a lot of people out there that are cardiologists who pretend to know internal medicine, and I guess they just really don't. So with that, we're going to bring in from Hawaii and around the world, the very famous Dr. Michael Patness. Dr. Michael Patness, medicine and science, can you help us out here with MPOX and COVID-19? This is something we should be worried about, especially this MPOX thing.
Well, good morning, Nick, and good morning, Rick, and to all the others at your organization and to your viewers all over around the world. It's exciting to be able to spend a few minutes with you, and I thank you for the opportunity. I just want to make a couple of comments, and I'll get into some interesting data. You made the point about people who are not experts opining as experts. If you go to a hospital and you're being treated by a doctor for an infectious disease, if it's a significant infectious disease, you're going to be seen by, and it's a substantial hospital, you're going to be seen by a doctor who's fellowship trained and board certified in infectious diseases. That doctor has been granted privileges by the medical staff, which is the doctors, grant that doctor privileges to take care of infectious disease patients. No other doctor in the hospital has those privileges. Doctors are granted privileges in hospitals based upon their credentials and their training and their demonstrated competence. Cardiologists have to be trained and do a fellowship in cardiology, gastroenterologists in gastroenterology, neurologists in neurology, and infectious disease doctors are fellowship trained in infectious diseases. You can't be a cardiologist and do infectious disease consultations in a hospital. Why? Because you don't have the training and you cannot be credentialed as such by the medical staff. This is to protect patients from harm. But yet out in the public space, any doctor can claim to be an expert in infectious diseases. And that's a big problem. If you look at the doctors who are anti-vax, what you'll find is that none of them are infectious disease doctors. None of them. They don't have any training in it. They are a mixture of other kinds of doctors, cardiologists and family doctors. Some are not doctors at all. They're PhDs. That's great. I applaud their information. But if you're not an MD treating patients, you don't have any business commenting about as an expert on a clinical matter. And some have no training at all. There's one very famous anti-vax doctor who has an MD degree, but never even did an internship. Can't even get a license, has never seen a patient. How can he comment as an expert? There's another who's very famous who has 1 year of pathology internship, and that's it. That doctor is not an infectious disease doctor. So it's very, very important to vet and question the people that you see on TV and on social media as to what their credentials actually are or aren't. I am a board certified internal medicine physician with added qualifications in infection control and hospital epidemiology. I'm actually qualified to opine as an expert in matters related to infection control. I also have a master's degree in physiology and biochemistry with an area of interest of nucleic acids, which is what, when we talk about viruses, they're made of nucleic acids. So with that, I have some updates for you about COVID and MPOX, which has gotten in the news lately. So, the anti-vaxxers tried really hard to convince everybody that COVID was a hoax. It wasn't very bad. It's just the flu. Trump said it was just going to go away like magic. And when the emergency was declared ended by the World Health Organization, they said, see, it's gone. Well, it was never gone. It just filtered down and tapered down somewhat. But in the last couple of months, there has been a very big resurgence in COVID. And here's some data from this morning. Right now, the positivity, the test positivity rate out there in the public is 18.1%. What that means is nearly 1 in 5 people who are tested for COVID are positive. Nearly 1 in 5. So if you're in a room with 5 people, statistically, one of them has probably got COVID and is sharing that virus with you. This is very disturbing. In the week ended August 10th, 2.4% of all visits to emergency rooms in the United States were due to COVID. 2.4% of all visits. So for every 100 people in the ER, 2 of them were there for COVID. 3.3 people were hospitalized per 100,000 population. So people are still being hospitalized for COVID. And 1.9% of all deaths in the United States for the week ended August 10th were due to COVID. Nearly 2% of all the deaths in the United States last week, just before August 10th, the week before August 10th, were due to COVID. 2%. 2 out of every 100 people who died in this country died of COVID. Tell me that this disease is gone. It's not gone. It was never gone. It came under better control because initially nearly half the country got vaccinated. Why is it back? It's back because people have, under the influence of the anti-vaxxers, given up on vaccination. Less than 20% of Americans are now fully vaccinated, and that means had the initial series and then have been updated with the most current vaccine. That means 80% of people are offering their bodies to manufacture COVID virus. When you think about a viral infection, we'll keep it with respect to COVID just so people will stay focused on it. Think of yourself or think of the patient with COVID as a copy machine, just like a Xerox copier at the office. And just like that Xerox copier is churning out documents, thousands of documents. When you get COVID, you're a Xerox copier. You're churning out copies of the virus. You become a virus factory. Where does the COVID virus come from? It comes from you. It comes from people who are infected with it, who make it. And infected people make it, replicate it, mutate it, reproduce it, and disseminate it. You're a COVID virus factory when you're infected. And that's why it's so important to be vaccinated, because that will reduce your likelihood of getting COVID, reduce your likelihood of producing virus. That's a very, good thing to do. The most important reason, though, to get vaccinated is because it will reduce your risk of dying by 95%. That's what vaccines are primarily all about, is preventing death and severe disease. And for that, the COVID mRNA vaccines are highly effective, 90 to 90% effective at reducing death. They are about 50% effective at reducing any disease and reducing transmission. Now, I see patients every day, and although I'm semi-retired, I still spend a few hours every day seeing patients. And since July 1, I've seen somewhere close to 600 patients in the last month and a half or so. And of those, about half of them had COVID. Of those, nearly all of them were good candidates for treatment with Paxlovid. Thank God we have that drug. And here's some interesting observations. Now, this is not a valid, this is just my observation. It's not science per se. But of the roughly 500 patients I've seen, about half of them had COVID. Of those, nearly all of them have had COVID before. So much for natural immunity. None of them were up to date on their vaccines. None of them were up to date. Most of them had the initial series in 2021, but have not been updated. And I have not seen, this is just my own, not statistically significant observation, I have yet to see in this recent surge a single patient with COVID who's fully vaccinated and boosted with the current variant vaccine like I am. I've had 7 COVID shots. I just got my last one in the spring, and there's a new one coming out, and I'll be getting it as soon as it's available. So I've not seen anybody who's up to date on vaccination among these 500 patients that I've seen recently. So I think that tells you something. It tells you that if you're not up to date, you're more likely to get sick, and having prior infection doesn't prevent you from still getting sick. And I haven't seen anybody who is fully vaccinated and up to date who's had COVID. So it's out there. It's still killing people. 1,000 Americans died last week from COVID. And our best protection is to be vaccinated. And everybody should be vaccinated. It's a tragedy that the anti-vax movement has been able to convince so many people not to be vaccinated. They're the ones responsible for this surge. They're the ones responsible for the 2% of deaths in the United States last week. 95% of those people would not have died had they been immunized. All right, now what about MPOX? There's a lot of chatter now about MPOX. MPOX is a viral infection from the orthovirus family. It's a distant relative of smallpox, which doesn't exist anymore. But MPOX has been around for a long time, and it's been largely confined to Africa. There's two kinds of MPOX. One is the one that people are concerned about, which is mostly in Africa. There's been a few cases in Europe. It has not spread around the world yet. But they did raise the alarm about it because here's why. This what's called Clade 1 MPOX. There have been recently in West Central Africa, there have been 27,000 patients with it, and 1,300 of them died. That's a mortality rate of 5%. And death from MPOX is not good. And that even if you don't die, it's a bad disease. It causes a terrible, blistering pox-like thing. There is another MPOX called Clade 2, which is in the United States. I've seen 2 patients with it just in the past couple months. It's a much milder illness. And between 2022 and 2023, there were 32,063 patients in the United States with MPOX Clade 2, and about 58 of them died. So people do get MPOX in the United States. We're just getting the more milder one, but still 58 people died of it. That disease, that virus is largely associated with men who have sex with men, but not exclusively. And because men who have sex with men may also have sex with women. And so the virus can be transmitted to their female sexual partners. The 2 patients I've seen with MPOX, one was a gay male in California, and the other one was a heterosexual female in Arizona. So it's not just a gay disease because sexual habits are varied. So this new MPOX, the Clade 1, the one that World Health Organization raised an alarm about, is bad, and it is primarily in Africa. They are rushing vaccine to Africa right now. And it raises the question, why didn't they already have the vaccine? It's because we don't treat the third world very well. In the United States, within the gay and bisexual community, MPOX vaccination uptake was very good. They quickly got vaccinated. And I think that's why the numbers of MPOX in the United States, Clade 2, went down so much. There was a spike in 2022. It's come down. So if the very bad MPOX spreads, we'll find out. There is a vaccine for it. But as of right now, that's pretty much confined to Africa and a little bit in Europe. But the CDC and World Health Organization, this is what they do. They're working diligently to clamp down on it, contain it, stop it from spreading, and vaccinate people. And thank God for them. So that's really pretty much my update for today. I continue to be very concerned by the uncontrolled poisoning of the discourse by these fake COVID experts who are not infection experts or infection control experts, saying things that are not true. No one challenges them. No one vets their credentials. No one exposes them for not being infectious disease doctors. And they are influencing, I dare say, more people now believe them than believe legitimate doctors and infectious disease experts. So with that, I will shut up and open the floor for discussion.
So I read a very persuasive analysis of the cycles of COVID. This is year 5 of COVID, and this guy looked at the spikes and says basically we get a spike a year. That at the end of the summer, when people go back to school, and then into Halloween and Thanksgiving, it creeps up and then levels off for a second, then goes crazy at Christmas, and we get our biggest spike right at New Year's, and then it declines for 6 months. And we all think, oh, it's COVID's done. Our long nightmare is over. Can take off our masks. It's over. And then the upslope starts again, either when we go back to school in September or when we get hit with a new variant like the flirt variant. And so we got hit a little early this year with the beginning of the upslope. So in LA and probably nationwide, the number of average cases per day is 12 times what it was 3 months ago. And so
yeah, exactly. It's a very contagious virus. It's mostly transmitted airborne, so it floats in the air. So someone can breathe it out at the grocery store, and it's floating in the air, and you happen to walk through their breath. So that's the primary mode of transmission. But people forget that the virus can also can glom onto your secretions. So there are droplets as well. Just because it's primarily aerosol doesn't mean that it's never droplet spread. So those droplets can land on surfaces and it can be transmitted that way as well. That's not the dominant mode of transmission, but this idea that it's like it's exclusively airborne. It's not all or none. Airborne is the predominant transmission. Droplet transmission also does occur, and this is why masks are useful. Yes, the virus is tiny. If it's aerosolized, it can go through the mask. The pores in the mask are bigger than the virus, but that's not the only mode of transmission. Those masks catch your nasal secretions and so forth. So that's why masks do work. There is good epidemiologic evidence that masks reduce the spread of viral respiratory infections.
Well-fitting masks,
like
well-fitting masks.
Yeah, doctors' masks. The ones you guys wear that are like, those are kind of bullshit. You want an N95?
I mean the N95s, yes.
Yeah, they have a nose clip that keeps them tight around here. They're tight all the way around. So because if every breath isn't going through the mask, it's shooting over the mask, under the mask. It's not much protection.
Yeah, you're right. When I say mask, I'm referring to N95s, so Dr.
N95. Dr. Patmos gave us some data. I went ahead and got vaccinated because I'm going to be traveling. But he gave me some data that I think is very alarming, that I was not aware of, because major media has shut out COVID as if it's gone away. And that's not doing a service to the people that are out there. And here's some data I did not like to hear from you. Number one, 18% positive with COVID today. That's a pretty big number. That's a lot of people that are COVID.
3% is the target number. You want to be at 3% or below of
that's what I'm saying.
That's a lot of Xerox copiers. This
is not a good number. And what gets me is this is totally now pushed aside by major media. So I did it serendipity. I just went and got my COVID vaccination because I thought I was due for something. But if I saw this, I'd have gone a lot faster. Number two, this data I didn't like. 2.4% of everybody in ER is from COVID. That's not good, because the thing is, that means a lot of people are going to the hospital. Then this isn't good. Almost 2% of people are dying of COVID today. And if you're saying they're clipping at 1,000 a week, that's 52,000 a year. That's more than all the murders in the United States. I mean, it's frankly should be on the front page of all the newspapers.
Exactly.
Instead, it's all gone away.
I think the same thing happened 100 years ago with the 1918 flu.
It did.
I think they said it was gone after 2 years. I think everybody continued to get sick, and they just kind of ignored it.
They ignored it, right? Yeah, but see, the thing is, I don't like to ignore this data. 1.9% of deaths of COVID today. That's pretty big, you know. And the thing is, I'm glad I tuned in to watch your program, Dr. Patmos, because then all I can think is what a fool I would be if I didn't take the vaccine.
Yeah.
And because I didn't hear anything about it, which by the way, I didn't, hear anything about the resurgence. I kind of got a little glimpse that, hey, there might be something going on. But you're right, the anti-vaxxers have a bigger voice right now on media than the people that are doing legitimate work. And it's disgusting.
And what troubles me is there's no consequences for their misinformation. If they gave that information to an individual patient within the context of a physician-patient relationship, and they gave incorrect advice, and that patient went on to suffer harm, then that would qualify under the law as negligence or malpractice. But yet they give that information out generically to the public and not in the context of a specific physician-patient relationship. They can do all sorts of harm, which they have. People believe them, people suffer consequences, and there's no accountability for it at all. Medical boards, by and large, won't touch it. There's no laws against it. So imagine, we talk about COVID, but let's make an extreme example and ask yourself, what's wrong here? What's missing? Let's say a doctor were to go on Fox News and say, rabies is no big deal. If you get bitten by a dog with rabies, don't get the rabies shots. I recommend against it. Imagine if a doctor said that. We all know that rabies is essentially 99.9% fatal. There's no treatment for it. There's only, post-exposure prophylaxis with these, with the rabies shots. And most people know that if you get bit by a rabid dog, or you think the dog might be rabid, or the bat might have rabies, you go to the ER and you get this series of shots. Imagine if a doctor, using his authority and his degree and his license, went on TV and said, don't get the rabies shot. And there'd be no consequence for that. People would die. That's exactly what's happening. We have people who are licensed physicians, though not trained in infectious diseases, going on TV telling people, don't get the COVID vaccination. And then people are getting the disease and dying. Why? How can there be no consequence for that? That's an indirectly killing. And we're not talking about a handful of people. There were 1.2 million deaths from COVID. It's been well estimated that 300,000 to 400,000 of them were needless due to refusal to be vaccinated. These people are killing people. Why can't they be stopped?
Sometimes the consequences go the other way. There's a woman who runs something called Health Nut News, and she's one of the dirty dozen 12 biggest distributors of COVID misinformation. And I did a nasty tweet that she was throwing dangerous bullshit out there, and I got a tweet from her saying, you keep doing this, and I will sue you.
Yes.
So I backed off because, she would lose the lawsuit, but It would cost me
a lot of money.
$30,000 to defend against the lawsuit.
Yes, that is true. A lot of these anti-vaxxers are funded, oh, by the way, with big time GOP money. A lot of Koch brothers money flows in, because I got a letter from one of their lawyers. It just happened to be one of Trump's lawyers. I got the letters I said, I know that name. That's one of Trump's lawyers. And I got a threatening letter. So I know that Trump, the GOP money, is funding the legal attacks that the anti-vaxxers mount on anybody who criticizes them. You criticize them, and they will definitely do what's called a slap lawsuit. So it's a lawsuit to just get you to shut up.
Yeah, it's strategic lawsuit against public participation. And in some states, they actually have SLAPP and anti-SLAPP. But, over a period of time, what happens, Dr. Patmos, the litigation gun goes two directions. And I think it's just a matter of time that they all become party defendants to a class action suit. Because plaintiffs' attorneys are looking at this already. And frankly, there's a lot of damages that they could bring up. The problem that they face, of course, is doctor-client relationship, because when you're on the television, you're just blabbing things around. Have you really established a physician-patient relationship? You see the problem? But we'll see in the long term, because some of the attorneys are very creative to get around that. But if they had a physician-client relationship and they made such a statement, then, like I said, the litigation gun shoots in both directions.
If you go to a hospital, the percent of staff and patients who are masked is, I don't know, less than a third, depending on
the. Yeah, well, usually the doctors wear masks because they're smarter.
Yeah. But you made a great point. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Nick, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Go ahead. Well, I just said the doctors wear masks.
Yeah,
because
we are. Yeah. But you're right, Rick. hospital administrators are not generally physicians, not generally infectious disease doctors or infection control people. A lot of times they ignore the infection control people, and they've been, they can't staff. They just a nursing shortage. So a lot of hospitals have backed off on masking requirements, and some hospitals have held firm. Some states, Massachusetts, have said nope, you will mask. But other states have given up, and some hospitals are just getting lax right there. And patients, I just talked to a patient yesterday who got COVID while she was in the hospital for another issue. She was in the hospital for pancreatitis, and while she was there, she got COVID. Patients have the right, when they go to a hospital, not to be infected by their caregivers. And that means the caregivers have a duty not to infect their patients. They should be vaccinated, and they should wear masks.
It's interesting in the litigation front. Like I said, it evolves also as well, which I think the anti-vaxxers, and I've seen the misinformation that's gone out there, are not really aware how dangerous what they're doing is. In other words, and here's the thing. Although here's the reason they're getting away with it right now, Dr. Patmos, which when I was an estate planning attorney, we used to joke about it. If you did malpractice when you're a estate planning attorney, the witness against you is dead. You see what I mean? So if you messed up his estate tax, the biggest witness against you has died, and so they can't testify. In the same thing in COVID-19, the person who could bring the cause of action saying, I listened to Dr. X on the radio, he told me there was no problem with the vaccination and I shouldn't take it and all this other stuff. He had studies. That's your best witness, is dead. Okay. And so one problem that the plaintiff's attorneys have is they need a witness who lived and said, well, I finally went to see a doctor, got Paxlovid, I'm okay. But I was listening to Dr. X and he kept telling me I shouldn't be taking the vaccine. And then you can establish quasi relationship. So I'm telling you right now, the plaintiff's attorneys are looking at this right now. They just haven't fired the gun yet. I've seen this action before in certain other legal areas.
They got to find the people who survived hospitalization. Find the people who were in the ICU and survived.
Exactly.
And we'll have them.
Exactly. In other words, you need somebody who didn't take the vaccine, listened to this individual, and that was the causation, the reason they did it, but lived enough to now testify and file a lawsuit.
Some cops used to tell you that in case of a home intruder, don't just wing them, kill them.
Exactly, because the witness is dead. And so the thing is, it was the same thing, because I was a 13-member JDLM, JTCPA estate planning law firm, and we met all the time. And that's the reason peer review is good, because the lawyers would fight each other to make sure everybody's doing things right. But one of our jokes was, well, what happens when we committed malpractice and there's this big estate tax due? Well, who's going to testify? It'll be your client. Well, where's your client? They're dead. And it kept the liability down. And so frankly, malpractice insurance is very inexpensive for estate planning attorneys because they didn't get sued because the person who could sue them is dead. And the same thing's happening with COVID. When they get wiped out because they die, then the biggest witness isn't there to testify.
Yeah, anti-vaxxers like to talk about the loss of personal freedom when we locked down in 2020. But the biggest loss of personal freedom is when you're freaking dead.
or you're on ventilators in a hospital. I don't think I think your personal freedom is compromised quite a bit there. And the other thing that's being compromised is Mark's trying to beam in, but just as he's beaming in, we're beaming out because we're past our time limit. So I want to thank Dr. Patmos. I learn something new every time I watch the show. Now I feel better that I took the vaccine because I have seen a lot of the anti-vax propaganda that's out there. I go, well, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it's not that bad. 18%, that's bad. 2% dying, that's bad. 1,000, that's bad. So people really do need to consult their physician and stop listening to the people that are purported experts. And we'll see you next week on Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network, on Roku and Amazon, and also throughout the world. Take care. Bye-bye.